Hello, my name is Freddy Salmon Mijage from Edukea Tanzania. Welcome in this session to proceed with our second topic in Form 5, History, which is Africa and Europe in the 15th century. So today we are going to look on the social developments in Africa. But on the last session we ended on looking the similarities and the differences in the political system in Europe and Africa. So today we are going to see the social developments which existed in Africa. The first one was education. This refers to the transmission of skills, knowledge, and norms from one generation to the other generation or to another generation. By the 15th century, Africa had its own education system which was largely informal in character. It means that the education or development in education it was there in Africa before the coming of colonialism. It means education refers to the transmission of skills and knowledge from one generation to another. And by the 15th century, in Africa had its own education system which largely based on which was largely informal in character. It means that before the coming of colonialists, Africa had its own education system which was informal in nature. The young people acquired knowledge by imitating the behavior of their elders. It means that the young people in the society were acquiring the knowledge and the skills through imitating what their elders were doing. However, it should be noted that there was little in pre-colonial Africa, especially along the Nile River in Egypt and Mali. It means that another education which were present in Africa before the coming of colonialism was formal education, which was existed in some parts of Africa, especially the areas which were along the Nile River in Egypt and Mali, whereby Egypt there were university which was based on religious teachings that was called Al-Shahaz University, and the university which was in Mali called Timbuktu. As well as in Morocco, there was another university called Fez. So these were universities that indicated that there was formal education in Africa before the coming of Europeans. Another was religion. There is strong evidence that by 15th century, Africa had its own religion. To me, that before the coming of Europeans in African continent, Africa had its own religions by 15th century. And religious ceremonies were presided over by community elders. Example, ribbon of the Maasai and the clan heads of clan organization. It means that there were religious ceremonies which were practiced over communities by the community elders in the African societies. For example, the ribbon of the Maasai and the clan heads of clan organization. It means that those Maasai and their clan heads were practicing the religious beliefs or religious ceremonies in their societies. These elders were responsible for supervising religious ceremonies like organizing sacrifices. It means that the elders in the societies were the ones who were responsible for supervising the religious ceremonies like organizing the sacrifice or provision of sacrifice to their gods. And the African religion was largely based on believing on gods, on many gods. So you can see that before the coming of Europeans in African societies, they had their own religious believing. So after looking the social development, let us see the significance of trade in the societies between Africa and Europe. What were the significance of trade in the society between Africa and Europe? The first one was both trades found in Africa and Europe led to specialization, whereby a group of people emerged and specialized in different economic activities. For example, in Africa, the emerged group of specialized in agriculture, fishing, iron melting, pastoralism, and trade, as well as in Europe, there was emerged of groups of people who specialized in different economic activities such as traders or merchant kings, people who specialized in farming. It means that the significance of trade in the societies of Europe and Africa were as follows. The first one, both the trade which they involved in, it means trades found in Africa and Europe both led to the specialization of activities, whereby there were emergence of groups who were specialized in different economic activities. For example, in Africa, there were emergence of groups who specialized in agricultural activities, like Baganda in the northern parts of West Africa, fishing activities. For example, in Africa, there are intercastrian regions, like Karagwe Kingdom. The society of Karagwe were responsible or were participating in fishing activities. But there was iron melting, whereby the iron tools were produced. Even pastoralism, like we can take example of Maasai society. Those were the society of pastoralism in East Africa or in Africa, as well as trade. And the same in Europe, there was emergence of specialized groups who specialized in different economic activities, like trade, like merchant kings, the kings who were supported their people to practice or to involve or to participate in overseas trades, and the people who were specialized in farming. So this was another what? This was the significance of trade activities in Africa and Europe. Another was both trade found in Africa and Europe during the 15th century led to the development of science and technology in African and European societies. It means that the involvement in trading activities in both Europe and African societies led to the development of science and technologies in their societies. For example, it led to the development of shipbuilding and marine technology, as well as compass bearing, whereby traders used the advanced tools to travel in other parts of the world to look for raw materials, market, cheap labor, etc., and area for investment. It means that both in Africa and Europe there was traveling of merchants or of the people, whereby they traveled from their origin areas or from their motherland to other parts of the world in order to search the area for investment, raw materials, market for their goods, and the cheap labor who could work for the Europeans. As well as in Africa, there was development in making canoes, as well as marine technology. It means that this was the development of science and technology in marine, whereby canoes in Africa was made, and in Europe there was shipbuilding, as well as invention of compass direction or compass bearing, which was used in directing the merchants or the sailors when they were in their movement in the sea. Another, for example, in West Africa, traders across Trans-Saharan did that used the camels from West Africa to North Africa. used the oars as means of transport, to mean that there was the use of camels and oars, whereby the West African societies were crossing the Saharan desert by using those animals, camels and oars. So these were the advancement in science and technology, whereby animals were discovered to be used as the means of transport. And the third one, significance of trade in European and the African societies was both trades found in Africa and Europe led to emergence of states. It means that trade that was emerged in Europe and Africa led to the emergence or formation of states. For example, in Africa, Ghana, Songhai, Mali, Oyo, Benini, Mwanamtapa Empire, Milambo Empire, as well as Europe, there was emergence of states, especially in Europe, in Britain, and later on France due to the trade. It means that both in Europe and African states, there was the emergence or formation of states. For example, in Africa, there was many states which were formed, like Sudanic states, which included Ghana, Songhai, and Mali. But there was another forest states like Oyo, Benini, Dahomey, Mwanamtapa Empire, Milambo in East Africa, and others. So this thing was happening in Europe the same, whereby Europe there was emergence of states, especially in Britain and later in France. It means in Britain and France there was emergence of states which was formed in as a result of trading activities due to the trade. In addition to that, the trade found in both Africa and Europe led to the emergence of trading centers and the growth of towns, which later led to the urbanization in both Africa and Europe. It means that in addition, the trading activities that was conducted in both Africa and Europe led to the emergence or the growth of towns and the cities and the trading centers as it led to the urbanization in both Africa and Europe. For example, in Dodoma, Warata, Gao, Jere, but we also had some towns like Bagamoyo, Zanzibar, Mombasa, Kilwa, Pete, Lamu. These were the trading centers and cities which were developed or grown as the result of trading activities in Africa. As well as in Europe, there were towns due to the trade activities such as Liverpool, Yorkshire, Lancashire, Manchester, Venice, Brussels, and the other cities and the towns which was grown in Europe as the result of trading activities. Another was both trades in Africa and Europe led to emergence of goods and strong leaders who later controlled the state. It means that both in Africa and Europe, it means trading activity that conducted in both Africa and Europe led to the emergence of goods and strong leaders who later controlled the states. For example, in Africa, Mansa Kankani Musa of Mali, Askia Mohammed of Songhai, and the Mwanamtapa Empire. These were the leaders who led their states which were emerged in Africa. As I've mentioned the examples, like Mansa Kankani Musa was the leader of Mali Empire or Mali state, but another was Askia Mohammed who led Songhai Empire or Songhai states, as well as the leader who led Mwanamtapa Empire. Another was both trade found in Africa and Europe led to emergence of strong armies, which was well disciplined to protect the state and its roots. For example, Britain, there was emergence of Navy Army. It means that both trading activities that conducted in Africa and Europe led to the emergence of strong armies which were disciplined or well disciplined by their leaders in order to protect the states and their territory at large, and to protect the sailors or the merchants when they were in their sea routes. For example, Britain had developed the strong military or army that could defend or protect the merchants or the British merchants when they were in the sea routes. For example, the Navy Army of Britain, which was developed under the Queen Elizabeth of England. These were the army which was the result of trading activities in Europe. As well as in Africa, for example, in Nyamwezi state, there was the outstanding army which was established by Milambo and Nyunguyamawe. These were armies were responsible for protecting the states or the empire. Even in Buganda, there was the establishment of strong army which was responsible for protecting the Buganda kingdom or states and their territories, as well as to expand and conquer the neighboring states. So this was the result of trading activities that was conducted in both Europe and Africa. Another significance of trade in both Europe and Africa was both trades found in Africa and Europe led to emergence of people who later become rich because of being involved in the system of exchange in the societies. It means both trading activities conducted in both Europe and Africa led to the emergence of rich people or rich merchants who participated fully in their trading activities because they accumulated a lot of wealth. For example, kings and individual traders who involved in trades, who involved in the trade were become rich. It means that, for example, kings and individual traders who involved themselves in the trade were become rich people. For example, in Africa, Mansa Musa or Mansa Kankani Musa of Mali become rich person or rich leader in Mali. Askia Mohammed in Songhai become the rich leader in Songhai. There is Samora Toure or Samora Toure. Another was Milambo in Nyamwezi. Mwene Mtapa, and in Europe there was kings who were become rich because of the trading activities which they participated fully. It means that in Europe kings also become rich because they got much profit from the trade. Another significance of trading activities took place in Europe and Africa was both trades found in Africa and Europe led to the emergence of strong faith because the trade led to the unity among the people in the society. It means that the trading activities that conducted in both Africa and Europe led to the emergence of religions or strong faiths. For example, the trans-Saharan trade in Africa led to the emergence of Islamic faith West and North Africa, while in some East African societies there was emergence of Christianity due to the long distance trade. It means that in both Africa and Europe there was the emergence of strong faiths. As for example in West Africa there was the emergence of Islamic faith or Islamic religion that was that was resulted from trans-Saharan trade. And in East Africa, there was the emergence of Christianity because the people of East Africa participated or conducted trade in contact with the people from the coast and Asia. As well as in Europe, there were emergence of Christianity due to trade conducted between European societies. It means not only in Africa, but in European societies, there was emergence of Christianity religion or Christianity faith as the result of conducting trading activities. Another one was trades, especially in Europe during 15th century, led to the growth of industries, whereby different industries were built using the wealth accumulated from the trade. It means that the participation of trading activities by the European societies led to the building of different industries in European societies. For example, during the mercantile era, there were many Europeans who were involved in mercantile or overseas trade, and they accumulated a lot of wealth, and that wealth was reinvested in the industrial sector, and many industries were built so as to produce many manufactured goods which will be returned to African countries and other parts of the world for searching the market and accumulating another capital for investment. For example, textile industries, agricultural equipment industries in Europe were established so as to produce the clothes which could be sold in other countries which were in need with in textile products, as well as agricultural equipment industries which was needed in America, whereby there were plantations introduced by the European powers. But another, in Africa as an example, there was industries which was developed as a result of trading activities. For example, the salt making industry and the copper processing industry, which was in Axum and Meloe. These were the examples of areas which were developed in industries. Another significance of trading activities in both Europe and Africa led to the establishment of financial institutions like banks such as Barclays Bank, House of Lloyds in Britain after the Merchant Kings and other. It means that the result of trading activities led to the emergence of financial institutions. For example, in Europe, in the nation so-called Britain, there was development of institutions like Barclays Bank of 1756 and the House of Lloyds in Britain. Another was Amsterdam Bank in the Netherlands. That was the result of trading activities that was conducted between the European societies. After the Merchant Kings and others being involved in trading activities, traders had accumulated profit from the trade conducted between European nations and other continents of the world. It means that the traders accumulated a lot of wealth or profit from the trade conducted between the European societies and other parts of the world, and that accumulated wealth was invested and being accumulated to be stored in the banks, and the banks were introduced in order to store the profit which was accumulated during the trading activities. So after looking at the significance of trading activities in both Africa and Europe in the 15th century, let us see the impacts of trade or system of exchange between Africa and Europe during the 15th century. What were the impacts of system of exchange or trade between Africa and Europe during the 15th century? The first effect or impact, the trade led to the stagnation of African technology simply because Africans who were skillful and knowledgeable were taken as slaves to offer their labor in big plantations and mining established by European absentee owners in America during the 15th century. It means that the trading activities that was conducted between Africa and Europe led to the stagnation of African technology, simply because the Africans who had the skills and the knowledge for developing the technology in Africa were taken as slaves to offer their labor in plantations and the mining centers which were established in America during the mercantile era or during the 15th century. Another impact, the trade also led to the exploitation of African natural resources such as minerals, raw materials, etc. It means that the trading activities that involved Europe and Africa led to the exploitation of African natural resources like minerals involving or such as diamond, gold, copper, silver, as was precious metals in European countries, as well as raw materials which were taken to feed the European industries. It means and others were taken specifically for the development of European nations. It means that the African natural resources were taken to Europe for the development of European nations. Another impact was the trade conducted between Africa and Europe during the 15th century led to destruction of African culture and introduction of European culture in Africa. It means that the trading activity that conducted between Africa and Europe in the 15th century led to the destruction of African culture and gave the room for the Europeans to introduce their culture in African societies. Because it was during this contact, African way of living, dressing style, marriage and eating were destroyed. It means that during the 15th century, when the Africans became in contact with the European societies, it is the time when the African living style, dressing style and the marriage as well as the eating style were destroyed by the Europeans and replaced by the European culture. By Europeans, as Africans began to imitate what Europeans brought to Africans. It means that after the coming of the contact of Europeans and the Africans started or began to imitate what the Europeans were doing or were brought in African societies. Another impact was trade contact between Africa and Europe during the 15th century led to the fall and rise of some African states. It means that the contact between Africa and Europe led to the rise and fall for some states in Africa. African states which existed before the contact between Africa and Europe during the 15th century collapsed, like Western Sudan states like Ghana, Songhai, and Mali. These were states or Sudanic states which were there before the contact between Africa and European societies. But soon after the contact, those states were collapsed. While some other African states like the army emerged due to the fact that their leaders and the prosperity of the state depended on the triangular slave trade. It means that some states like the army were rise or were lost or were developed because their leaders were depended and participated fully in the trade or in the triangular slave trade, whereby their leaders were the slave captives, they were the slave dealers. They were selling the slaves to the Europeans. So in one way or another, these states like Dahomey were developed as the result of the trading activities or the contact between Europe and African societies. Another was Trade led to the collapse of African trade that existed before the 15th century, hence led to underdevelopment of African continent and the development of European nations, simply because it was the trade that Another impact of contact between Africa and Europe during the 15th century it was paved the way for African colonization, simply because this trade is the one which led to the influx of agents of colonialism such as traders, missionaries, and the explorers. To me, that the trading contact between Africa and European societies in the 15th century paved or prepared the way for the African colonization, simply because the trade was acted as the loom which led to the much influx of the agents of colonialism in Africa, such as traders, missionaries, and explorers started their colonial ambition in Africa to explore the potential areas such as agricultural areas, mineral areas, lakes or seas, hence colonialism. Which means that what agents of colonialism led to the much influx of Europeans, agents of colonialism such as traders, missionaries, and the explorers to explore the areas which were potential for achieving the agricultural benefits, mineral areas or mineral resources, and the water bodies which were potential for the European countries, hence led to the colonialism. So until there, this I can say is the end of our lesson. So I would like to give you the 2 questions which you have to perform in order to add some skills and knowledge about Africa and Europe in 15th century. Which is, the first one is explain the roles of trade contact between both Europe and Africa in the 15th century with 6 points. And the last one is assess the impacts of both European and African contact in the 15th century. And you have to give up or to give out the 6 points. Until there, this is the end of our section. I thank you for being with me until the end. Welcome in the next session.